Good afternoon. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Thank you all for joining. I want to go ahead and welcome folks as they're coming in to our first webinar of the 2024 Spring Resiliency Academy series. My name is Annette Oso, Managing Director of Resilient Virginia, and I want to recognize my colleagues, Trish Porter, Jerry Cervenka, and Ann Randolph-Whitlow, who worked on planning this event and are assisting with production today. I do want to let folks know that the session will be recorded and shared with attendees and registrants. You're invited to introduce yourselves in the chat box. Attendees will remain on mute throughout the session. Please feel free to add questions to the Q&A box. We'll be addressing your questions or comments after the presenters' presentations. Note that the transcription feature is enabled, and please feel free to use that if you so choose. The Resiliency Academy series, which began in 2020, has taken on a variety of themes each year. So this year, it's going to be, we're focusing on climate and hazard mitigation planning. Today's session on understanding climate in Virginia sets the stage for the next 3 webinars that will introduce FEMA's requirements on including climate in your plans and bring together tools and resources for developing local hazard mitigation plans. The agenda today, as you can see, will be the welcome remarks. We'll have a brief audience poll that will give folks a chance to indicate which sectors they're from, and that helps inform, provide information for the speakers. We'll have a brief presentation from our sponsoring organization, and then proceed with the speaker presentations. And as mentioned, we'll do the question and answers at the end, save those for the end. And then look ahead to the rest of the spring series here. So right now, we'd like to do the audience poll. Again, please let us know what sectors you're from. We'll have about 30 seconds on this, 30 to 60 seconds on this. Well, let's close the poll then and share the results. So looks like local governments, about 20%, regional government, 11%. And then some from the state, a few federal folks and community organizations, and about 13% nonprofit. Thank you for sharing. We'd like to thank our Resiliency Academy sponsor for this year. Both the spring and fall series is being supported by ERISA, the Mid-Atlantic CAP RISA program. And this grant, their grant program that is supporting us is made possible through NOAA funding. We also want to thank our annual sponsors, and at this time, Marion Enterprises, ECT, and Clark Nexon, as well as our government, institutional, and individual members, and our generous donors. Your support enables us to distribute a wide range of funding and information resources on resiliency, and to convene events such as the Resiliency Academy and our biennial conferences. Now I'm having the pleasure of introducing Lena Easton Calabria, the Marissa Program Manager, and she's going to provide a few highlights about their program. So do go ahead, Lena.
All right. Thanks so much, Annette. Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Easton Calabria, and I am the program manager for the Marissa CAP RISA program. As Annette said, we are a NOAA-funded team, and we are located in the Mid-Atlantic. Joining us here today online is also our PI, who's based out of our RAND Washington, D.C. office, Krista Romita Gracholski. And she might be throwing some links in the chat as I speak, so keep an eye on that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So before diving into Marissa specifically, I want to give an overview of the CAP RISA program. CAP RISA stands for Climate Adaptation Partnership / Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments. There's a bit of a name shift happening, which is why we are the CAP RISA program. But it's actually a national program that's funded by NOAA. And the goal is really to bring together diverse disciplines and sectors to enhance learning and decision-making to prepare for the impacts of climate vulnerability, variability, and climate change. As you can see here, there's a number of different regions that are represented here. MRISA is in purple. We have folks directly to the north and south of us, and we collaborate and meet regularly with CAP-RISA teams across the country to share learning, best practices, and other opportunities. So next slide, please. So MRISA, we are operating in the Mid-Atlantic Chesapeake Bay watershed. You can see here the mapped outline of our region specifically. And we are a partnership of researchers from 7 institutions. We're based out of the RAND Corporation, where I work, and also our PI, Krista Romita-Gracholski, also works. And then we have researchers from Penn State, Johns Hopkins, VIMS, Cornell, Carnegie Mellon, Morgan State, and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, that's VIMS, but I'll say that out. But we have a diverse team of researchers, social scientists, physical scientists, and we are very much an interdisciplinary team. We were first established in 2016 with a 5-year grant from NOAA, and we received our second 5-year grant from NOAA in 2021. So we're in the middle of what we call MRISA 2.0, and really building on our work and relationships in the region. And we really aim to work with communities on the ground in the Mid-Atlantic to enhance resilience to a changing climate through place-based decision support, improved data, and public engagement. So next slide, please. And I wanted to give a brief overview or just an opportunity for you all to take a look at some of the resources that MRISA builds. We do work on the ground with communities throughout the Mid-Atlantic, and we also build tools like the tools you can see here. We have a number of different expertise on our team, and I want to highlight that we actually provide free technical assistance to practitioners, local governments, really community members, anybody on the ground in this region that is looking for support in these areas of expertise. And over the next few Academy sessions, you'll be hearing more about our climate and hazard mitigation planning tool, which was really our focus with this collaboration with Resilient Virginia here today. But we do have these other resources as well. We're always looking for folks, who might be interested in testing out our tools, providing feedback. So if you're interested in doing that, please get in touch. And like I said, we provide technical assistance to do that. Next slide, please. Thanks, Annette. So before I hand it off to the next speaker, I just wanted to kind of reiterate why MRISA is here today. So we were able to hold a small grants program and competition that was funded by NOAA to actually support different organizations on the ground in the Mid-Atlantic in focusing on these different issues that are arising in the region. And one of those, as you all likely know, because you are here today, is a need for more information and data around climate and hazard mitigation planning. So Resilient Virginia received the grant for that focus, and we're really looking forward to continuing to work with Resilient Virginia throughout this academy and in the future as well. So with that, I think there's just one more slide with our contact information. So please feel free to get in touch with either myself or Krista, or visit our website here. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Lena. And we'll go on from here now to introduce our invited speakers. We're happy to have Jeremy Hoffman, Director of Climate Justice and Impact at Groundwork USA. Dr. Jeremy Hoffman was the lead author of the Southeast chapter of the Fifth National Climate Assessment. And he's also an affiliate faculty member at VCU and University of Richmond. An award-winning environmental educator and nationally recognized for his climate science work. Jessica Whitehead. Dr. Whitehead is the Executive Director of the Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience, or ICAR, at Old Dominion University. She was the lead author of the Northeast chapter of the Fifth National Climate Assessment. So we have a great representation here today. And in Virginia, she is a member of the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee and was the first Chief Resilience Officer in North Carolina. So definitely had experience in North Carolina that she's bringing and sharing with us in Virginia here. Third is Brett Wills, the owner of a consulting firm, Wills Soil and Stream. He's also been for a long time involved with the Virginia Association of Biological Farming, both as the president and then now as program manager, working with the farm community on sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices. So we're very pleased to have a great set of speakers today, and let us start now with Jeremy Hoffman. And Jeremy, I understand you're going to go ahead and show your slides, right?
That's right, Annette. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you
I'll
for
stop sharing then.
The kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I recognize a lot of names in the participant list. It's nice to be joining you today from Richmond. I'm Jeremy Hoffman. I'm the Director of Climate Justice and Impact at Groundwork USA. We're an affiliated network of 21 place-based environmental justice nonprofits around the country, including right here in Richmond, Virginia. But over the last couple of years, I've had the really unique opportunity and honor to serve as the chapter lead for the Southeast chapter of the Fifth National Climate Assessment. The Southeast is a very large region, 11 states, starting with, in the southwestern corner with Louisiana and Arkansas, coming up through Tennessee and Kentucky over to Virginia, where we're at, and then down to Florida and everything in between. This is a very large place to seek to do a really usable and effective climate assessment. And I'm excited to share with you some of the findings of our chapter today. And I'll maybe stealing some of Jess's, Dr. Whitehead's steam here, but if you haven't heard a lot about the NCA5, it happens every 5 years or so, depending on the wind of the time period. And there are tons of chapters, and there's some new ones in the NCA5 that didn't exist before, including an economics specific chapter and a social systems and justice chapter. And there's some really great focus kind of like boxes on particular issues, like the Western wildfires, which cause really poor air quality to happen here in Virginia, depending on which way the wind is blowing. I would encourage you to go and take a look across not only the regional chapters, which will relate to places that you've been and seen, but there are also national topic chapters, which you can use to inform your scientific interpretation of policies related to things like cities, transportation, human health, forests, you name it. So I encourage you to go and explore NCA5 in its entirety. NCA2023.globalchange.gov. One other really, before I get to that, just a quick little timeline overview for how the NCA5 Southeast chapter was developed. I was selected as the chapter lead in late 2020, early 2021. At that point, we went through a series of different public engagements around what a rough outline of our chapter could look like. We held 6 different stakeholder meetings with various audiences, including youth and stakeholder and really important practitioner audiences for the Southeast chapter. Later in the series of drafts, which we had to make 3rd, 4th, 5th order drafts of this report chapter, we also went through a National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Math peer review process, which yielded 3 pages of detailed scientific review, as well as we we're able to integrate the contribution of over 100 public comments over the course of the time period. So this is really, I feel like, a chapter that reflects the interest and needs of Southeast communities as well as practitioners. But you can also explore now, this is a really huge publicly facing opportunity as part of this, is that you can go and actually download the data that underlies many of the graphics that you see in the NCA 5 through atlas.globalchange.gov. You can actually investigate, download, visualize data related to things like precipitation and temperature for various global warming levels. It's a very, very unique tool that the USGCRP put together for this particular national climate assessment. So I encourage you to go and play around with that, as well as the many amazing tools from MRISA and the MRISA team. So pleasure to be here. Let's talk a little bit about the overview. Basically, the introduction of our chapter centers on the idea that the history of the Southeast informs its present day environmental risk and then its future vulnerability to those risks. Almost without question and without fail, without exception, all of the climate change indicators reported on in previous National Climate Assessment Southeast chapters have only continued to intensify, including things like relevant metrics of overnight temperatures, extreme precipitation, and so on. And the projected future impact of those things is also directly related to the long-term emissions of global carbon emissions. And for every increment of global warming, the corresponding impact on the Southeast and its disproportionate exposure to those risks because of its history of marginalization and disinvestment in particular communities over others, those impacts get progressively worse and more acute in those particular places across a variety of different types of threats. So what we've done in this chapter is to split up that content, which is summarized what I just kind of said, is to explore that across 4 different key messages that correspond to a particular kind of subtopic. In this case, the first key message is about our regional growth. As many of you know, the Southeast had the largest amount of population change from the last census in 2010. Most of that growth has been concentrated on the coasts and in urban areas, and there's been a loss of population across many of our rural areas. This same almost identical pattern is expected to continue into the future. And here on the left, we have the colors correspond to the percent change in population from 2010 to 2020. And on the right, we have the projected change under SSP2, which is kind of a middle ground population change projection in 2050. So this population change exposes more people to climate threats that are growing along the coast, as well as in our cities, and while kind of limiting the amount of capacity that rural areas have to leverage against these same risks. Most, if not all, of the development in the Southeast has occurred in the suburban and exurban periphery around our cities. We highlight here 3 different cities: Richmond, Virginia, Jacksonville, and Atlanta, showing areas that went from forested in 1985 to developed in 2020 in the red. You can see just about any metropolitan area of the Southeast has had that kind of red ring around it. The Southeast has lost more land to developed land cover than any other region in the United States. Something close to 2 million football fields worth of forest went from trees to pavement in the course since 1985. And of course, those areas that we're encroaching into are areas of very high biodiversity importance. On the left, we have areas of unprotected biodiversity importance. And so the choice of how we continue to grow in the Southeast is directly related to the health and quality of the ecosystem around us. Going back to the climate threats, we've seen a bunch of hurricanes, really destructive hurricanes since the last NCA, and those risks disproportionately impact very sensitive housing types like rental units. And we know that by the end of or the middle of the century, those flood-related impacts, both related to things like extreme precipitation and onshore flooding from storm surges, are expected to also intensify. So we, again, here highlighting the kind of vulnerability of the present superimposed into the future, in this case, along the concept of flooding. Now, also, We talk about flooding in the sense of major flood events in coastal areas brought on by sea level rise. We provide newly updated estimates of sea level rise by the mid-century for a variety of NOAA's sea level rise scenarios. But we choose to show what this kind of looks like in practice. Hurricane Irma in Jacksonville created very major flood event conditions. And by 2050, that area affected, which on the left is shown by the red, orange, and yellow colorings, becomes 5 times more likely. And that's under even just this intermediate high sea level rise scenario. But we do highlight that throughout the Southeast, communities are stepping up and taking a variety of different opportunities to adapt to the climate threats that are changing around them. Which you might recognize here, Groundwork RVA planting a stormwater garden in Southside Richmond, Virginia. We also focus on things like our health, again, juxtaposing the past to the present and the present to the future. We reflect on the fact that the Southeast has one of the lowest life expectancies on average, as well as some of the highest social vulnerabilities, and that those situations are exacerbated by climate risks. We focus on heat in this part of the chapter, talking about the projected change in 95-degree days, superimposed on energy-burdened households and communities of color on the left. We also talk about energy burden writ large and how the Southeast it has some of the highest electricity bills in the entire country. We also talk about when the expectation of power goes out, warm season blackouts are actually on the rise and make up a majority of the blackouts that affect people in the Southeast. So this, of course, when you lose the ability for power, you lose the #1 intervention that we use in the Southeast for extreme heat, which is air conditioning. We also talk about air pollution. I encourage you to look into these sorts of discussions a little bit more deeply. It's a complex situation in the Southeast, superimposed by external kinds of threats like the wildfires in the West and in Canada. We also talk about the economics and the vitality of the Southeast communities, talk about rural capacity, kind of hearkening back to the beginning of our conversation. We also talk about the total economic damage. We also reflect on things like the sorts of economic impacts that crazy and climate exacerbated weather events can have. We talk about the price of inaction too. We talk about taking proactive adaptation and how much money that saves both companies and consumers into the future. This one's related to transportation, but we can also talk about energy infrastructure as well. It almost always means taking a proactive adaptation approach saves us billions and billions. Like half the cost in the future is offset by taking action now. So it's actually a really hopeful message, I think, as well. Throughout the chapter, we do take the opportunity to highlight where we can indigenous cultures in the Southeast and their practices and how they relate back to climate resilience. In this case, we talk about the Gullah Geechee, working with FEMA to update their policies related to heirs property, which means that there is a landowner, but there's very limited paper trail for it. So it's becomes complicated when it gets to federal policies that are seeking to funnel money into homeowners to build resilience. We also talk about River Cane. I encourage you to go and read about this. It's a very fascinating thing. I didn't know we had a native bamboo in the Southeast until I started working on this chapter. We finish the chapter with a discussion about agriculture and the threats experienced by agricultural communities. You may not know this, but the Southeast has more Black farmers than any other region in the South or in the country. And these farmers not only face the socioeconomic issues related to the history of the Southeast, but also experience a disproportionate amount of climate impacts. There is a bit of a disagreement in the models about where and by how much there will be damage or benefit due to climate change in the agricultural community. But this is directly related to the ability of those farmers to then actually take on the practices that keep their operations safe. That's a very quick overview. I encourage you again to go and read it for yourself. Take a deep dive. It's a very rich chapter, and we had a lot of people working on it. I was fortunate to be the chapter lead. But Stephen McNulty at the USDA Forest Service was our coordinating lead author. We had a stellar team of co-authors from around the Southeast. And yes, I look forward to hearing what you have to say or any questions. And thank you for the opportunity to share this Resilient Virginia.
Thanks, Jeremy. And please do put your questions or comments or thoughts in the Q&A, and we'll get back to Jeremy at the end with plenty of time for conversation. So I want to next ask Jessica Whitehead to speak. We wanted to bring in some more regional perspectives on what's happening in Virginia. And so of course, ICAR and is leading the way on a variety of programs and activities related to the coastal area. So, Jessica, please do go ahead, and I believe you're managing your slides.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jess Whitehead. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience at Old Dominion University, based out of Norfolk. I am not coming to you from Norfolk today. Oddly enough, given that the annual topic for hazard mitigation for Resilient Virginia this year is hazard mitigation planning, I am at a Department of Homeland Security Center for Excellence in Coastal Resilience meeting on disasters and equity down in Chapel Hill. So I am squatting in a random person's office right now, but very happy to come to you today. If you don't know the Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience, we're based at ODU. And we advance the practice of coastal resilience and adaptation by engaging with communities, organizations, and businesses to develop and deploy solutions that are based on integrative, innovative, and applied research. Really, what we're seeking to do at ODU is to catalyze the action that we need to make sure that we are building vibrant coastal communities, strong economies, and healthy ecosystems throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, despite natural hazards and climate change. I am also the lead for the Northeast chapter of NCA 5. And for those of you who are wondering, wait a second, you're in Virginia too, you're not in that region. Quirk of the geography of the U.S. National Climate Assessment, the boundary between the Southeast region and the Northeast region is the border of Virginia. So DC, Maryland, and the remainder of the Chesapeake Bay are all in the Northeast chapter. Hence, someone who specializes on coastal resilience issues and in the Chesapeake, ending up as the lead for the Northeast chapter. Traditionally, we make sure that Chesapeake issues are covered in the Northeast and in the national climate assessments. So I wanted to go over a little bit from some of the other places outside of the Southeast chapter in NCA 5 that talk about Virginia's coastal resilience action, and then really quickly overview many of the activities that are going on. With my deepest apologies, I saw a few names from DCR, from HRPDC, from Middle Peninsula PDC. A lot of you are the ones who are absolutely doing this work. So I'm just going to do a quick survey, and there are lots of folks. If I mess something up, please make sure to chime in down in the chat. So a top line key message of the overall U.S. climate assessment, national climate assessment, is that we're taking action on climate change. And in particular, as someone who specializes in city and state level adaptation, we saw since the last NCA 4 in 2018, nationally about a 32% increase in the number of city and state level adaptation plans and actions that have been initiated and put into place. That's comes in addition to a 14% increase in the number of new state level mitigation activities. In the Southeast, and I want to pull this out of one of the figures in this overview chapter, you can see that Virginia has historically been a leader, both in the state level and state actions and city and state level actions for mitigation and adaptation. In Virginia, I think it's very, very good to call out that while we have had disasters that were significant, the passage of Hurricane Sandy, the effects of Hurricane Matthew in many parts of the Chesapeake, the scale of those disasters compared to the scale of federal funds that have come in some of these other states due to multiple other disasters including Florida, Louisiana, the increasing action in North Carolina. Virginia has been able to make progress on its own despite those major infusions of federal disaster dollars. So I think that that's important context setting, especially as you're going through to talk about hazard mitigation throughout the year. Now, a lot of our messages in the Northeast chapter related to the Chesapeake Bay are related to coastal and ocean impacts, a lot of those related to habitat change. So I'm including those in context for this group so that you know them, but asterisk, a lot of these kind of actions that are coming up as a result of changes in coastal and ocean habitats are not the types of actions that get funded in a hazard mitigation plan. So keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but it does mean that if you're thinking through about projects that you want to scope out, that you want to pursue funding for, FEMA may not be the federal source of funding that you end up looking for. It may be another federal program. But what we do see throughout the Northeast, including the Chesapeake Bay, is this real unprecedented rate of warming. In particular, we see more and more frequent marine heat waves that are occurring, sea level rise, ocean acidification, all of these in addition to just the baseline warming that is occurring along our coasts in that Northeast. We see a shift that's then happening in the productivity in the region in particular. So exactly how well the biological function is of several of the species that we care about. A lot of them we care about because they're very charismatic, because they have a lot of value, right whales, but a lot of these are also species that we like to eat. Black sea bass, rockfish, lobster, a lot of these other species. And we're seeing this shift in life cycle events of these marine resources that are happening as a result of the changes of climate in the Northeast. And we see this beginning to spur a lot of the adaptation action, particularly in efforts like coastal wetland restoration, in addition to changes in fishing behavior. I wanted to highlight here the projected changes in coastal forests in particular, because we know that this is something that we see along the banks of the Chesapeake Bay. Rising sea levels in particular acting in combination with changes in rainfall patterns to begin to force a transition of freshwater forested wetland to salt marsh, and to the degree that those can move upland, and then the ultimate loss of salt marsh. In all of these cases, especially as we look forward to 2060 and 2100, rising groundwater tables in combination with sea level rise, on top of things that we know will not go away, like our regular high tides, like storm surges, as all of these factors combining to really push this habitat shift. So what is being done in coastal Virginia to adapt to risks? This is a very quick survey, not a whole lot of detail. What we've historically seen in coastal Virginia is a push to do some adaptation planning. And Virginia was really very quickly out of the gate in this. The Norfolk Vision 2100 plan was one of the first plans that was produced as a part of the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities efforts back in the mid-2010s. But we see multiple other efforts that have gone forward, whether we're talking about the Virginia Beach sea level wise adaptation strategy that was done with Dewberry Consultants, whether we're talking about the multiple consultants and academic partners that have been involved in developing the Living with Water Hampton plan, or the moves to do these joint land use studies, which are very closely directed at ties with Department of Defense facilities in Norfolk and Virginia Beach, Chesapeake and Portsmouth. Planning is something that has happened very widespread along your higher resource jurisdictions in coastal Virginia. The state also developed a coastal resilience master plan. It was released in 2021 under the Northam administration. It has been continued with tremendous effort from the Youngkin administration. So something that really has been pursued with continuity from administration to administration and is in the process of an update. So DCR is the lead entity on this. They're doing a fabulous job and really continuing on with some of these guiding principles that include acknowledging climate change, but also very, very important things like advancing equity, including to the degree possible that we can, natural and nature-based solutions, recognizing that yes, a marsh may not completely be able to stop a 10-foot storm surge, there are a lot of co-benefits of these natural solutions that are being put in the ground that go beyond just the basics of risk reduction. And increasingly in the federal funding space are desired components of these projects, whether focused on natural and nature-based solutions on their own or in combination with gray solutions. It takes a region-specific approach, and it's very specifically looks at trying to find some of these most cost-effective solutions. And then what we've seen in the federal government in particular over the last 4 years is this real push to start spending money, get past plans, getting projects implemented and on the ground. Whether we're talking about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, as many of you had to deal with last summer, everyone was calling it the summer of money, where these grant requests for proposals were flying out of Washington about as quickly as the federal government could produce them. There are also state funds that are available, both the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund. And so doing these plans opens up the ability for you to actually move forward and get projects done so that it's not just a plan that sits on a shelf. So some efforts that are also going on, that initial Virginia Beach sea level wise project actually is now going into a series of, they're packaged together and under this ripple effect branding of the Virginia Beach Flood Protection Program. This is funded by a bond referendum that Virginia Beach passed to fund about $560 million worth of stormwater reduction projects that all include sea level rise. So a lot of money that Virginia Beach is putting in the ground. The city of Norfolk also takes a very holistic approach. Some of what's been done historically are these hazard mitigation grant program kind of projects like home elevations, but things like seawalls, wetland restoration, building and providing information, so mapping that's available, a lot of the work that has been done with ways to produce real-time estimates of when flooding may occur so that people can be rerouted inside the bounds of the city, living shorelines and breakwaters. These are all things that the city of Norfolk is doing, in addition to the construction project that has come out of the Coastal Storm Risk Management study that was done and is now moving forward to a $2.6 billion construction of a 5-phase project. Phase 1 includes the seawall and extending the seawall, which I think a lot of folks are already familiar with. But the project also pulls in concepts of storm surge barriers, in addition to natural and nature-based solutions and other non-structural measures like home elevations in other parts of the city. Virginia Beach has one of these coastal storm risk management projects that is in progress. The city of Hampton is actively looking for one. So these are large, really large sources of funding that are potentially available, but extremely long to manage and do require a local share, but being done with Army Corps of Engineers funding. Again, Army Corps of Engineers projects, not the only way that these localities are moving forward. The Resilient Hampton Initiative, I think, is a really good example of, in addition to looking at the Army Corps and studies and proposals that could come out of Army Corps funding, they're looking at these citywide and watershed level plans. They've done an amazing amount of public engagement, including nonprofits, neighborhood level design workshops, engagement with universities, and recognizing that the Army Corps projects are really oriented toward these big 100-year coastal storms. We have flooding that comes from other sources, rainfall, sea level rise, tidal flooding, like we're experiencing along the coast with the storm that's come past this weekend and the last few days. So Hampton also has an environmental impact bond that they're using to fund these watershed projects in New Market Creek. It's not just the urban areas of coastal Virginia. The Middle Peninsula has the Fight the Flood program that the Middle Peninsula PDC runs. And what it does is it matches property owners who have flooding issues with grant funding, funding that they have available, and matches it with contractors who are working with property owners and try to figure out places where funding can be used, particularly on private property. A lot of these grant funding proposals, requests for proposals, are oriented toward work being done on public property. But you know, if you work in a rural area, if you live in a rural area, you'd have people who you care about in rural areas. Most of the land there is privately owned, and sometimes flooding happens. Sometimes flooding happens on private property, and that results in flooding on other private properties. So what Fight the Flood does is it tries to take a look at different ways that some of these needs can be matched up with the private sector contractors. One item that the Institute for Coastal Resilience does is a part of a Go Virginia project that's led by Virginia Sea Grant, Middle Peninsula PDC is involved, several others, is recognizing that so many of these projects are based on having a private sector that can do the contracting to get the project in the ground. So how well and how prepared is that private sector? So Carol Considine leads this for us, partnership with Environmental Defense Fund, several other entities who are involved as this Coastal Virginia Adaptation and Resilience Consortium to pull together the architecture and engineering firms to make sure that they have the resources and the connections that they need to be ready to bid on these projects. And progress toward formalizing governance. Stay tuned. In the past, the Commonwealth has had a Chief Resilience Officer who is also the Secretary of Natural Resources. Having been a Chief Resilience Officer for a state myself in the past, I cannot imagine having both of those jobs at the same time because they are two full-time jobs. Bill 1458 has been passed in the House. It's waiting the governor's signature based upon the work of a resilience coordination working group that was 35 parties throughout the Commonwealth that made recommendations to formalize the office of a Chief Resilience Officer and fund it. So this is awaiting the governor's signature, and stay tuned what that means. So takeaways, Coastal Virginia is making progress. There's a lot more that we have to do. Additional steps that are being taken are really trying to formalize this governance and participation across the Commonwealth, whether that's through the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, whether that's through the forthcoming statewide flood blueprint, which I didn't talk about because I wanted to talk coastal today. Whether that is, improving coordination at the PDC level or at the locality level, this integration is happening across all levels of government, and recognizing that there is an increased interest in supporting this private sector adaptation, really industry that is emerging in coastal Virginia. So with that, I will leave you very quickly with my email address and pass it off.
Thank you, Jessica. Get back on here. And I see folks are putting in questions into the Q&A box. Thanks so much. I just want to note that there's as Jessica has indicated, an incredible amount and a long history of work in the coastal areas has been going on in the state. And we're pleased to see that in movement toward a statewide effort now to assess need and develop solutions across the state. So with that, we wanted to have some input from Brent Wills, who works in the more central part of the state. It is in the agricultural sector as indicated. So we'll have Brent Wills speak to the effects of climate change on the agricultural sector. Go ahead, Brent.
Thank you, Annette. Hi, everybody. How you doing today? I appreciate the Resilient Virginia folks having me. I think I've done this a couple times now, a conference a couple years ago, so I really appreciate being able to kind of look at the other side of the coin from what Jeremy and Lena and Jessica were talking about, looking more at the sort of the upland land management and how it's affecting people, growers and producers on the ground, and how markets are driving that, how science is driving that, and how certainly climate changing, the issues of climate change that we see, how it affects folks on the ground in their day-to-day lives is pretty important. So thanks again for having me. My name is Brent Wills. I am co-owner with my wife, Anna, of Bramble Hollow Farm in Montvale, Virginia, which is Bedford County, kind of on the eastern slope of the Blue Ridge Mountains, really on the line between the Piedmont and the Blue Ridge Mountain region, Southwest Virginia region. And we have a farm here called Bramble Hollow Farm, where we raise pastured poultry and pork. We also have a breeding program for poultry, as well as a small high tunnel and some other various and sundry activities that I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing here. But I want to highlight some of the things we're doing because in the last 7+ years that I've been working with the Virginia Association for Biological Farming, I've really seen a shift in not just the demographics in farming, but in the management practices that farmers are not only imploring and implementing, but that they're wanting to know more about. We're seeing a lot more emphasis on soil health practices and regenerative practices. You've heard those words. And really what that means is we're trying to find better ways to cycle carbon through the system. And for those of you that really know anything at all about some of the climate issues we're talking about and we're dealing with, it's basically a result of our sheer inability or unwillingness to cycle carbon better. And in the food production system, that's pretty important because, you know, we're really creating carbon with sunlight and photosynthesis, and then we're trying to decompose that carbon through our decomposition process. So that's really the crux of agriculture. So harnessing that is becoming a much more intriguing and interesting thing for a lot of farmers, even those that may have been more conventional. So let me tell you a little bit about our farm here. I told you we raise pasture-based poultry and pork. Here's some of our pastures. We raise different types of systems, day range systems. All of our animals have access to grass and forest paddocks pretty much at all times, except for the dead of winter when they might be in pens. But otherwise, they're fully pasture-based. There you see some of our pigs in the woods and on pasture. That's kind of the way we started doing it 20 years ago here when we first, actually this, the 31st of March will be our 20-year anniversary of being here on this farm. So we're kind of looking forward to that. One of the things to kind of answer some questions about adaptation, not necessarily climate related, but just adaptation in general, is that we have started working with some other local farmers in our area with a small membership group, a farm cooperative called Edible Goose Creek. And you can see there that there's some of the products that we provide. We have a CSA, we do memberships, we have networking sessions and skill share sessions on farms. We have a couple times a year, we'll do a potluck with all of our members, and we'll provide some sort of a workshop or a networking session or something like that at those times. So a lot of farmers who are doing or farming in small and mid-sized diversified farms are finding a lot of ways to adapt to the changing markets, changing supply chain issues that we may be dealing with. A lot of those are indirectly related to, you know, climate change and some of the pressures that our farmers and our communities are feeling. So just some of the ways that we kind of diversify our products. I've been doing farm consulting for almost 20 years now, and it frustrates me because we tell farmers all the time that they need to diversify their crops or diversify their livestock or diversify their soil microbes. We rarely talk about the importance of diversifying their markets. And so one way that farmers are really trying to find ways to be more resilient in the face of specifically some of the climate, you know, issues that we have, natural disasters and that kind of thing, supply chains. They're really looking to provide more of a local and regional market and do it a little more independently. Just a couple more pictures of some of the things at our farm. There's some shots of my cover crop in the high tunnel. We process all of our poultry on farm there in that upper left-hand photo. That's our what we call the chicken shack. That's where we process all poultry here on farm under USDA inspection and exemption in Virginia. The building on the lower left is a commercial kitchen building that we use to add value to our products here on our farm, as well as for Edible Goose Creek and other farmers in the community. So that's another way that we find that both in our community and other communities around Virginia that I work with, they're finding ways to work together and to really support each other in some of the issues that are being related to climate change and weather issues. That's our brooder building down on the bottom there with some young chicks in there before they go out on pasture. But really what I want to talk more about specifically as it relates to Resilient Virginia and a lot of the folks that I saw on the participant list is some of the work that we do with the Virginia Association for Biological Farming. And that's VABF, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. VABF has been around since the late 70s and has really been the premier organization to promote and educate about and advocate for biological and organic growers. There is no technical Virginia Organic Association, so VABF has kind of filled that role for a long time. And the reason that we're called the Biological Farming Association and not the Organic Farming Association is because not everybody that's farming biologically and regeneratively and with soil health practices, as we know today, are necessarily certified organic. They may not have the market for that, or they may not have the desire to go that way, but they're farming with what we call organic practices. And those are the soil health and regenerative practices that we were talking about. And we can talk about a little more as we go forward. But I served, as Annette said, I served as a president on the board of directors for VABF for 6 years. Now I'm the program manager for VABF. And what that means is we have grant projects, all kinds of projects going on across the state now, particularly coming out of COVID. As Jessica mentioned a minute ago, in the last year or so, there's been a lot of money coming out for agricultural projects and climate smart projects and that kind of thing. So we've tried to take advantage of that and really expand our capacity and be able to plug in using the network that we've had with biological and organic growers for the last 40 plus years. There are a lot of tools on the market now that we use, from new soil sampling type analysis, new techniques to really test the health of our soil. It's been for the last 30 to 40 years. You box up your soil sample, you send it to a lab, they give you back a piece of paper that tells you what your chemistry is, right? Your pH, what your calcium magnesium ratios are. They tell you what you can expect from nitrogen from decomposition, how much phosphorus you have, how much potash you have, how much sulfur you have. They haven't really been able to give us a good idea on how much vitality or how much life, how much diversity is really in that soil, which we now know is what really is feeding our plants. So there are different type techniques out there that farmers are using to try to get a better handle on, how is decomposition going in the soil? What is the carbon and nitrogen ratio? How much plant food can we really expect to get from the decomposition of organic material in our soil? And these types of soil health tests are giving us some different insight into how we can manage that. We also do a lot of workshops and on-farm tours, and we put on a really nice conference every winter. You can see there some of the tracks we have from our conference back in 2024, in January 2024, both focusing on soil health and carbon sequestration, which again is sort of a big thing when we're talking about climate issues, as well as regenerative grazing and livestock. So on the cropping side, we're talking about carbon sequestration. We're talking about things like no-till, reducing disturbances, whether they're chemical or mechanical, like tillage. We're talking about doing things like increasing crop diversity and looking at really adding cover crops in the off season of our cash crop to really boost that soil and feed the soil, in the off season. When we're talking about a perennial system like pastures, we're really using some different tools, and really the main tools there are the animals. We're learning ways, and again, the innovation is coming from the farm. So there are a lot of farmers that are doing this on their own, figuring out things that work and discarding things that don't work. And we're looking at ways to improve our pasture diversity and our forage health, the bricks and sugar content in our forages to make our animals healthier. We're looking at different types of rotations so that we're mob stocking at short periods of time, and then we're letting a longer rest period really allow that ecosystem and that multi-species forage pasture to come back strong before we go back over it again with those animals and stress those plants. So, again, kind of in the center down on the bottom, what we're trying to do is cycle carbon better. And whether it's soil health practices or regenerative practices or any of the sort of the newfangled terms that'll come up, that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about trying to sort of get out of the way of that carbon system and allow that carbon system to work in a much more natural way. Let's see. All right, I talked about the regenerative grazing. We're part of a project that's finishing up this year, working with the National Center for Appropriate Technology folks out of Montana. We're working with a project called Soil for Water, where we're getting ranchers together and we're bringing in experts to talk about how they really can make a difference in their day-to-day pasture management. Not all farmers are set up so that they can address all these issues. Maybe they don't have hundreds and hundreds of acres where they can break off and do these really intense pasture management techniques, but we're figuring out ways where we can do that on smaller scales and more diversified farms. So that's a really cool project that's helped a lot of grazers. Any of you who happen to be from, sort of the western part of Virginia, and that, around here it's a lot of grass, hayland, and pasture, not as much cropping because we're getting into the mountains. So it's a pretty good place to really reach out to a lot of grazers who may have been farming more conventionally and get them to learn a lot more about regenerative practices. One of the other projects that we're really excited about is ongoing with our partners at Pennsylvania Certified Organic through the USDA, called the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. And basically what that means is we're really trying to find farmers who are interested in transitioning to certified organic, meaning they're interested in understanding more about how their soil systems work, how to reduce those inputs that we know are not necessarily beneficial for our crops or our soil critters or even our humans, and partnering them up with farmers that are certified organic and really providing that mentor-mentee relationship. Again, putting on workshops, explaining to folks that, they're becoming certified organic may seem daunting, but if you really look at sort of the check the box and find out what you have to do, we're working with a lot of those certifiers and folks that are helping explain that to farmers so they can make that transition much more easily. Another project, again, like Jessica mentioned, is a project that came out of one of those big tranches of money from last year with USDA and that big Climate Smart project that everybody heard about and was clamoring for. We were fortunate enough to be able to partner with the Rodale Institute out of Georgia, as well as Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, Georgia Organics, Emory University, Wisconsin University, and several other partners on working with commercial vegetable growers in the southern Piedmont, which is basically from central Virginia down to about North Alabama, and working with them on implementing cover crops. One of the easiest ways that farmers that are farming more conventionally can really get involved in providing more climate smart and more regenerative practices is just planting cover crops, and not just planting rye or barley or oats, but planting a multi-species cover crop that's really going to pump that diversity, for your soil critters throughout the off season. So we're really excited about that. That's gearing up now. We're working with a handful of farmers and also farmers markets in Virginia that are going to be collecting data, not just on-farm data, but also farmer market data on the social science aspect of climate smart commodities and climate smart farming and those practices and how they affect our communities and how they affect farmers in general, and how it really affects all of us. So that's another one we're really excited about. We just partnered with folks called Climate Smart Solutions in Richmond, putting on a Common Ground movie. I don't know if any of you were able to attend that. It was at the Bird Theater last Tuesday, the 19th. That's another way that we can get the word out about some of these climate smart practices that are out there. There was a great panel discussion at that. So if you were able to attend that, I hope you enjoyed it. And then we've got a big workshop coming up this spring with Elaine Ingham. If any of you have heard of Elaine Ingham, she's kind of famous in the soil biology world for her Soil Food Web program. And we're going to be putting on a full-day workshop at Virginia Western Community College in Roanoke in May. And again, Elaine's going to come in with her crew, and she's going to teach our farmers in the Roanoke Valley region, basically how to look at soil under a microscope and how to identify some of these critters that we're talking about. Because, just because you make a compost pile doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be great for your plants. So knowing what feedstock to use, knowing temperatures, knowing aeration, all those kind of things really matter in sort of the type of microorganisms that we're trying to propagate. And so we're really excited about that because that's something we haven't been able to do in this part of the state so far. So that's pretty much all I have right now. Again, VABF is a pretty cool organization. You can sign up for our e-news if you go to vabf.org. We have an annual conference that it's growing more and more every single year. So if you're not familiar with it, check us out online. Email me if you have any specific questions about those projects you heard about. And otherwise, join us at VABF and show your support for biological and organic growers in Virginia. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brent. We're going to kind of be able to launch into some question and answers and comments, but I wanted to first have a few moments here of an interactive exercise with our audience here. We were going to get your sense of what you're seeing wherever you are regionally in Virginia. So we were going to do that through the Mentimeter exercise, if you all have done that before. This is to get a little sense of what are you seeing in the regions where you live and work. You can either scan the QR code or pick up the Mentimeter website in the chat. So let's take a few minutes just to get your sense of what are you seeing in your area as far as climate impact, whether you're coastal, central, far southwestern Virginia. We'd love to hear some comments from you or input from you about what you're seeing, and it'll become a word cloud. Right. Flooding and heat seem to be the central ones there. So, and no snow. I see that. All right. Well,
All right.
94 responses. That's about everybody. So we appreciate that. That's a great sense of what you're seeing locally here. So as far as questions, if we can have folks turn on their cameras, and then the audience can see the presenters. I believe Lena's in there also. Yes. So a variety of folks here. Let me just start with Brent. I had a question for you, and I see all the programs you're working on. And then what would you see as how could the Virginia Cooperative Extension be helpful, more involved with the bringing climate information to farm community?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, just in the chat, I was talking with Kirsten in Arlington about that, who's with Cooperative Extension. So yeah, we're actually, one of the ways that we're sort of trying to put a foot on the scale there is every opportunity that we have, whether it's at the federal level with the NRCS folks within USDA, or whether it's at the state level with soil and water conservation districts or Virginia Cooperative Extension, we're trying to find ways to have what we like to call train the trainer workshops, or farm tours or gatherings, or whatever they end up being. But one of the main ideas there is, look, I used to work for soil and water conservation districts years ago, so I understand that we have this cadre of people that are on the ground working with farmers every day already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is get some of this information in front of those folks. So a lot of folks in soil and water conservation districts, as well as extension, are learning a lot more about some of these practices and how it's no longer really limited to just the farm, garden, and small farm type producer. There are farms now that are farming thousands of acres that are using regenerative practices, and they see the results pretty quickly. So I think it's again, a lot of that innovation is being driven by the farmers on the ground, but when the extension agents see that, and the Soil and Water Conservation District folks see that, they really want to learn more about it and how they can, help promote those type of practices. So I'm really optimistic about it going forward.
Well, great, thank you. All right, now we had several questions about, well, in referencing the whole bridge incident that happened, unfortunately, today, and the questions about do we need to raise the bridges as the water level goes up? I don't know, Jessica, Jeremy, you all had some thoughts on that, but I don't know that climate was part of that problem there, but that was a question that came out of that incident from today.
Yeah, so as the information continues to emerge, it appears that one of the major factors in the collapse of the Key Bridge today was that the ship in question lost power and lost the ability to steer the ship, which is how it ended up running into a major support and having the bridge collapse. But this is a good question. What's being done in transportation to increase elevations of these bridges? And this is absolutely happening. VDOT has a resilience plan, and I know that they are looking at how do you revise design criteria, including things like bigger rainfalls, how much sea level rise needs to be built in where, how long is the timeline of how long you expect this bridge to be in service, and making sure that you've accommodated enough sea level rise. And it does start to come into design in certain places, not just in Virginia, but elsewhere. If you look at, so a lot of, I know that, increased sea level rise, if you have come down to Hampton Roads recently, you see where the HRBT is being put in and the bridges that go up into the tunnel approach. Those are a lot higher than the bridge currently is on the deck. And so there is some additional freeboard built into that. Another example is when the Bonner Bridge was replaced in North Carolina, for those of you who like to go vacation in the Outer Banks. That redesign of that bridge around a highly erosional area very much had sea level rise very quietly included in it. So it's higher. The design of the bridge swings out in an area that really cannot be protected because it is so highly erosional. And now you're starting to see the consequences of that happen in Rodanthe, because in fact, they cannot continue to protect that area. So it's absolutely something that is beginning to happen in transportation design.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. And I have a question here that speaks to what Jeremy was mentioning on the influx of people to the coastal areas. This one person is saying they live in Northern Neck. There's a fairly regular influx of new people and coming out there, and an uneven approach to flooding, storm prep, and understanding the CBPA, which whatever that is, okay, the coastal plan, I guess. And it's very unclear what elected and appointed officials think about the science, the changing weather, etc. And what is your suggestion, I guess, a suggestion as to how to maybe educate, bring some awareness to the local officials there?
Without knowing too much in particular about what exactly the influx of people is causing or perceived to be causing, I always find that locally relevant story-based data, and the higher the resolution that you can get or the level of detail, is the best to describing to an elected official how important that issue is. Many times, in my experience, elected officials don't recognize the variety of connections that there are between climate risks and a variety of other aspects of our day-to-day lives. And so the more detailed and the more detailed I can be about what that particular impact on a issue that they're particularly interested in can be, the more effective that message can be at them adopting it as part of how they talk about a particular issue. So for example, here in Richmond, the overlap between extreme heat exposure, which is very well understood in the city, has now made its way into discussions around transportation and specifically public transportation. And a lot of people that were elected officials in the region didn't have that awareness that one of the main ways people get exposed to extreme temperatures during the summer is through a reliance on public transportation. And if they do not have an adequate seating area with shade structure above their head, they are going to be extremely uncomfortable, and then add on top of that all the other potential overlaps with chronic illness and so on. So that has then shaped a little bit of the policy around equitable transportation infrastructure investments in the region. So that wouldn't have come about if the connection between this climate stressor, which is extreme heat, and this day-to-day experience, which is someone getting to work or to pick up their children or to go to worship in public transportation, that kind of conversation wouldn't have gotten really all that far in the past. So I would encourage you to really explore and reach out to folks like the MRISA team to explore what kind of data you might have at your disposal to have those conversations around what you find to be very important about this influx of people in your really nice region of Virginia.
Right, the Northern Neck it is a big area for retirement, folks going there for retirement. So I know there's that kind of an influx, and then Lena, Jeremy just referenced your data, and I wanted to highlight that you didn't mention this in your little presentation, but that people can go to your website and generate county by county kind of a back and front info sheet on what to expect in their area, whether it's I was just pulling up Buckingham County way out in the south of Charlottesville, or any county in the state. I don't know if you can just, while we're talking, pull one of these up just for a sample one, but it's a very nicely done thing, that information sheet that gives your basic projections on heat and precipitation, I believe, to look at as I'd say a starting point for conversations, as Jeremy is talking about there. And for the more western part of the state, it does mention impact on agriculture is some of the information there. So there's also Jessica Whitehead said she's mentioning another resource here. Jessica.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to pick up on that a little bit, and not intended to throw any shade on our MRISA colleagues, but knowing that we do have a lot of university resources that are based here in Virginia as well. We partner very frequently with our colleagues all over the country, but in a lot of cases, sometimes you need that sustained engagement. And when you're looking to whoever your local university is, it may be a little bit easier to get them there more frequently, whether you're talking about, folks at Virginia Commonwealth University, or, up in the Northern Neck. George Mason now has the Virginia Climate Center. ODU has resources that we provide. ODU actually has, in addition to the support that we provide our faculty throughout all of our colleges, we have research faculty who report to ODU, who are funded by the Commonwealth of Virginia 100% to report to ICAR to provide that technical assistance to people. So when you need things, especially when it's that kind of sustained need, you need somebody to be coming back over and over and over again. There's a lot of university-based resources, and when we have needs that are beyond us, we partner out. We partner with entities like the RISA program. They're going to be forever RISA in my mind. I'm sorry, I'm old. I know that they're CAPS now. These kind of places. where you can get some of these resources. But it's really tough. That kind of sustained engagement is the kind of thing that I used to do when I was extension specialist. But when it comes to things like the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, sometimes that's a science need that is really the cutting edge of where research is. So the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act is focused on water quality and the total maximum daily loads for varying pollutants that can go into the Chesapeake Bay. It's backed up by federal legislation in addition to state legislation. We don't have a lot of, we do a lot on water quantity. We do a lot on heat. We're not necessarily quite to the point where the science is doing a great job of saying, and this is how increases in water quantity or decreases in water quantity and stagnation and heat changes are affecting the impacts of those, water quantity or water quality kind of pollutants that we're concerned about. So that's one of the things that ODU is really hiring to try to bring in that expertise. We've got coastal engineering. We've got an urban ecologist. We're in the process of bringing on an economist and a green infrastructure specialist who will be pretty much available to Virginia communities. So there are a lot of, VIMS is here as well. A lot of what VIMS does is, that same kind of a technical assistance. And it's one of those things where a lot of this is extremely intensive to do. You may need partnerships that are years long. There's only so many academics doing this. So we actually do need all of the academics who are at all of the different universities to be able to have enough people to cover these problems. And we do partner and talk to each other.
Yeah, and I'll
So
just
thank
add
you.
to that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead,
Oh,
please.
I'll just add to that.
yeah.
So I've put a few MRISA resources in the chat. Krista put our outlooks in there, which I think is what you were referring to, Annette. And then
Right.
I've also put the link in for our climate and hazard mitigation planning tool, which has projected climate data at the county level scale. And that's something that will be, if you're interested in that, come to the next few sessions because we're going to be diving into that further. And then I'll just reiterate that this piece around technical assistance is very difficult. It is something that, MRISA, we do want to be kind of sharing that we increasingly are offering that, and it is free and it's available, and we don't know everything, right? And we want to partner with Jessica and all these, we are partnering with folks in the region. And so, please don't get overwhelmed with how many resources there are. I think all of us want to help direct folks to the right direction and to the support that's available as much as that is possible. So I just kind of wanted to add that on.
Right. And just to say, there's and Jessica, you have brought this up previously, the need to have some type of coordinating effort amongst the universities and a place where folks could go to really just access a variety of resources from the different universities and also the state programs, which are DCR developing their interactive website. I also want to say again, on the agricultural side, there are massive amounts of resources, and Brent has just indicated the different projects they've been doing that are USDA is actually supporting quite a number of efforts and projects, as well as other federal agencies. But there are a lot of resources on as regenerative agriculture, soil health, etc. And I just one person asked another question. I think they will have one more question, perhaps on the agricultural side, about seeing invasive species coming in. I think there was one particular question about earthworms, the type of earthworm, but that is another factor here for the ag community to address with climate change.
Yeah, it really is, because we're how many days go by before you see a headline of growing zones and regions changing, crop,
Yeah.
summer, southern crops will be planted in the north before our, in our lifetime, things like that. So again, it really goes back to really in agriculture, it goes back to trying to find ways to have the system be a more naturally operating on its own without quite as many inputs and interventions from us. And now, that being said, we have to plant seeds, we have to move animals, we have to be involved and sort of provide the guardrails. But what, a lot of conventional and dare I say industrial agricultural practices have done in the last 40 plus years is they've really taken that that organic matter component, that soil biological component that really drives the whole system, and it provides our flood control, our water infiltration, our carbon sequestration. So just the fact that we're shifting in that direction, more farms that operate more ecologically and they think about the whole ecology of the system, they don't tend to have the same problems with invasive issues, whether they be pests or disease or invasive wildlife, simply because they've not manipulated the system too far. So really the idea for VABF or for us, for a lot of these programs, is to get farmers thinking about it more naturally, more ecologically. That doesn't mean they have to stop using all chemicals. That doesn't mean they're going to stop some sort of tillage. But it means teaching them that there are other alternatives and things that they can think about that would be better for their land and their community in the long run, and not just necessarily about, what am I going to do this year for this crop?
Right. Thank you. And just one more question for Jeremy. With the massive amounts of data coming out of the National Climate Assessment for the Southeast, the Northeast, that is all public information, as you indicated, right? And folks can get in there, go delve into the GIS data charts and the charts, right?
Yep, there is a detail, and I will tell you, a painfully detailed record of how every single image and graph was made, the sources of the data, everything is available to you through the National Climate Assessment portal. The data at the highest level are available through the atlas.globalchange.gov website, but the metadata for each and every one of the figures that you can also download and use however you would like to are available as well. So you can kind of track down anything you want to recreate or reanalyze from the NCA.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all. We just have a few wrap-ups here, and what I wanted to do is point you all to the rest of the series, which will be, next one will be May 2nd now. We've changed the date, and it will look at, we'll be having the FEMA folks, VDEM, and some others speaking about the new guidance from FEMA on integrating climate concerns in hazard mitigation planning. So the others will look more at the variety of tools for climate and hazard mitigation planning. We talked about some of them today. We'll get more in depth on some of those, both state level and federal FEMA tools. And then the last session, June 18th, we're going to have a kind of a hands-on run through of using the Marissa Champ tool for local hazard mitigation planning. So that's what's coming up in this spring series. And then if you go forward there to the next slide, people are asking again about the slides, but we will share the slides. We will share the resource links. Notes that we are celebrating our 10th anniversary year. So we encourage you all to help us bring 10 more years of climate resilience resources and technical support to Virginia communities by supporting us today, becoming a member or a sponsor. We also invite you to take the brief exit survey, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next Resiliency Academy, May 2nd. So thank you for attending.